Court, please rise. May be seated.
The tribunal has discussed the statements and evidence presented by lead defense attorney Coco Schuster and lead prosecutor Miguel Fernandez, so that all the justices to form opinions based on the arguments. I'll begin reading some key determinations now. In their motion, the defense argued that the charges brought against the defendants violates the standards of ex post facto and nulla pone sine lege. Their key argument is that genocide was not against the law during the period for which it is alleged, and that therefore it is unfair to hold them accountable for breaking the law. However, the principle of ex post facto refers to actions that were legal when originally performed. And since genocide is a collection of murders committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part of a national, ethnic, or racial or religious group, and murder is illegal in most countries, as stated in the evidence presented by the prosecution, titled the U.S. Definition of Law and Murder. Accordingly, it cannot be said that the defendants were ignorant of the illegality of actions involved in genocide. Additionally, murder is morally and legally wrong in any country, which is indefinitely recognized by all citizens of the Axis and allies because it is malum in se, labeling killing as morally incorrect. The next concern raised by the defense is the issue of victor's justice. They argue that this court is inherently unfit and biased because the justices have deeply rooted biases against the Germans, have made up their minds, and have internalized resentment against Germans. The defense argues that the Treaty of Versailles was an example of victor's justice that led to World War II because of the scope and impact of its penalties, and that these trials led the same effect, using Defense Document 2. But this has it backwards, because rather than impose nationwide penalties that could devastate Germany for years to come, the trials are meant to hold specific people accountable for only the most heinous acts. The defense states that the justice from the victorious countries are biased and unfit to judge the defendant's crimes. However, because the war encompassed most of the world, and because people from Germany would be biased in the other direction, there is not going to be a more fit group of justices than the people who have practiced their entire careers to be unbiased. Defense references opinions on the desired outcome of the trial by a representative of one of the allied countries, Foreign Minister Andrei Vyshinsky, and attempts to generalize this view to the court. However, the defense has no evidence that members of the tribunal have expressed the same biases and therefore have no basis for their claim that the court has already made up their minds. It is crucial to note that the proceedings today center around the alleged actions of the defendants, not the nation as a whole. This trial is not intended to paint Germans or Germany in general with the crimes of specific actors, but to hold specific people accountable if it is seen that they are guilty of the charges presented against them. The defense stated that the alleged actions committed by the defendants were common practice in other countries. We deem this to be a stretch of the truth. While it is true that many countries have a higher threshold for violence during the war than in ordinary civil life, the alleged actions of the Nazis were of a nature that is more extreme and different in kind than the counts to which the defense is referring to. Furthermore, picking off the worst actions that other countries have done does not justify the broad practices of the Nazis. The defense mentions the Buck v. Bell case. However, the events on which that case was based did not represent a systematic, centralized effort to practice eugenics, as opposed to what the Nazis are being accused of. Discrimination like that affirmed in the Plessy v. Ferguson decision in the US was reprehensible, but did not involve sanctioned genocide. In each case brought up by the defense, the Nazis either practiced something to a higher degree or of a worse type, by both generalizing discrimination to entire groups and by systematically murdering them. The defense argued for dismissal based on the principles of ex post facto, nulla pone sine lege laws, victor's justice, and the common practice. Although genocide was not explicitly defined in legal terms prior to this hearing, it is merely a generalized case of murder, and so cannot be convincingly argued that the defendants were violating some norm they had no knowledge of. The behavior was deviant. The Nazis breached the set of social obligations that tie German citizens together as one people. Therefore, the principles of ex post facto, nulla pone sine lege do not apply. Because World War II encompassed the entire world, there is no party without some sort of bias. However, The justices will make their determinations based on the letter of the law and not personal feelings or national affiliations. Victor's justice refers to the situation in which the victors of war take advantage of the defeated for political and economic gain out of proportion with what is reasonable. Therefore, holding a trial that adheres to principles of law and justice can hardly be seen as a case of victor's justice. Finally, while there are instances of immoral acts and atrocities committed by some of the Allied powers as presented in the documents 6, 7, 9, and 10, several of them are isolated instances that do not rise to the level of common practice. Moreover, for those incidents that were more systematic, the Nazis are alleged to have engaged in the most extreme levels of these atrocities that have ever been recorded, and did so in a systematic and centralized manner. In other countries that the defense is comparing Nazi actions to, there had often been large groups of objectors who had argued against and overturned some of the acts and practices mentioned by the defense. German citizens weren't allowed to object in Nazi Germany, and there has been no process of correcting their crimes. Countries were not like Germany, and other countries didn't believe in their own practices. In the end, just because other countries have committed immoral acts in the past, this does not mean that the Nazis can be excused of their actions. The tribunal also recognizes all of the individual defendants' cases and will make sure to consider their common practice evidence as the trial continues. However, because of the types of crimes, the scale, and the horrifying nature of which the defendants are being accused, it is important for this trial to go forward, and this court is the most suitable setting for these determinants to take place. Thank you.
We will now be hearing the pretrial motion, Schutzstaffel criminality, led by lead prosecuting attorney Noah Bremen and lead defense attorney Maggie Zager. We will begin this motion of Schutzstaffel criminality presented by prosecuting attorney Noah Bremen. Please approach the stand.
The court should rule that the SS is a criminal organization and therefore all members of the SS are criminals. They should rule that criminality was the central mission of this organization and that all members of the SS had some role in carrying out that mission, whether that be actively working towards or simply acknowledging and being a bystander to the goals of this criminal group. The SS was not an organization whose members just happened to commit crimes. Criminality was built into every inch of its framework. It spread and publicized its mission through newspaper articles, pamphlets, speeches, and books. Each of its members was meticulously chosen because of their shared belief in SS values and their dedication to its mission. Because the SS was so criminal, its members so dedicated, and its mission so widespread and believed, the SS committed some of the most inhumane crimes the world has ever seen. The SS was created to efficiently and effectively commit crimes, and that's exactly what it did. The SS was originally created as a group of Hitler's personal bodyguards, hence its full name Schutzstaffel, which translates to protection squads in English. In June 1934, Hitler tasked the SS with orchestrating and carrying out the Night of Long Knives, where the organization brutally murdered Erich Röhm and other members of the SA. Having felt like the SS had clearly shown their devotion and dedication to him, Hitler then gave Himmler, the leader of the Schutzstaffel, free rein to carry out any policies he wished within Nazi Germany. The quote-unquote Jewish question quickly became the organization's main focus, and Hitler tasked the SS as the sole planners and executors of mass genocide. Criminality was built into the framework of the SS. Das Schwarze Korps, the Black Corps, was its official newspaper. In its August 8, 1940 issue, the newspaper stated that German peace must be a peace without the Jews. Here we see the mission of the SS clearly and openly stated in its official newspaper. The annihilation of Jews, mass murder, was the organization's main goal. Criminality developed at the top of the SS through Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS and leader of the Schutzstaffel, and filtered down into every other aspect of the organization. In a speech given in 1943, Himmler explained that whether nations live in prosperity or starve to death, interest me only insofar as we need them as slaves for our culture. Otherwise, it is of no interest to me. Whether 10,000 Russian females fall down from exhaustion while digging an anti-tank ditch in Germany interests me only insofar as the anti-tank ditch for Germany is finished. Because Himmler was the sole leader, the Reichsführer of the SS, his beliefs were bound to become the basis of SS ideology. An ideology created from the willingness to murder and work to death as many people necessary to achieve their goals. Himmler incorporated into the SS a feeling of indifference towards all non-Aryan, non-German people. And when an organization begins to think of other humans as dispensable, crime is inevitable. The process to become a member of the SS further highlights the racial discrimination against Jews and other persecuted groups that became the basis for the SS's existence, an existence built on criminality. Himmler explained this process where the SS asked a potential member for the record of his ancestry as far back as 1750, and naturally, the physical examination and his records of Hitler Youth. Last, but perhaps most important, was the certification of the Race Commission. The requirements of ancestry dating back almost 2 centuries and a racial exam to become a member of the SS shows the extent to which the SS would go to make sure that each member was a true Aryan. Race science was such a crucial part of the SS and was the basis of its racial ideology that led to the discrimination and mass murder of Jews and other minority groups in Germany. Every member of the SS knew its mission, beliefs, and core values. One SS book describes the organization itself as a band of definitely Nordic German men chosen according to certain viewpoints. Every single member was chosen because they believed in the mission of the SS. Additionally, the SS asked all potential members for their records of Hitler Youth. Members who grew up in Hitler Youth grew up learning and practicing the core values of the SS. They learned to hate the groups of people the SS wanted them to hate, and by the time they became members, they had already spent years working towards the mission of the SS. The requirement of Hitler Youth records was a core part of this organization. This program was created to teach children to be criminals, so as adults, criminality would come naturally to them. Hitler Youth made sure that each member entered the SS already believing in its mission. The extremely rigorous process to become a member of the SS further weeded out anyone who might oppose its core beliefs. Before a member's final acceptance, he was schooled again, specifically and ideologically, at which time he was thoroughly taught and instructed in the fundamentals of the SS. So not only did each SS member have to hold Nazi beliefs and values prior to their acceptance, but they were also further schooled in the main values that each member needed to have. Between their initial beliefs and the additional schooling, each member clearly understood the goals of the SS. Members not only understood and believed the SS's mission, but they were also prepared to willingly act as criminals on its behalf. SS members openly and unrelentingly fought Jews, Freemasons, Jesuits, and political clergymen, even when that task may occasionally have been heavy and represented the harshest human requirements. Each member believed in the mission of the SS, as stated above. Each individual member held the conviction that the National Socialist ideology must rule and passionately supported it, submitted himself voluntarily to the compulsion of obedience. Therefore, the SS man was prepared to carry out blindly every order which came from the Führer or was given by one of his superiors, even if it demanded the greatest sacrifice of him. Because each SS member was so passionate and so supportive of the values and the mission of the Schutzstaffel, they would willingly discriminate against, hurt, torture, and murder Jews and other persecuted groups. Every single member of the Schutzstaffel played an important role in keeping the organization running. The SS was a force of 200,000 men who were bound together by oath. The force of these men combined was what gave the SS unmeasurable strength. No matter the size of their role, by taking the SS oath, every single member was submitting themselves to the Schutzstaffel. Every single member vowed to be loyal to the SS and its values. They vowed to hold its ideals above everything else, and they vowed absolute obedience. And by doing so, they each became criminals, working towards the mission of this corrupt organization. The SS was like a machine, programmed to kill and repeat with no sense of moral obligation. In his Posen speech, Himmler explained how proud he was of the SS, that they were able to stand comrades who had left up against the wall and shoot them. So they have never spoken about it and will never speak of it. Himmler bragged about the fact that most of the members of the SS must know what it means when 100 corpses are lying side by side, or 500, or 1,000. Members knew what it meant to kill at least 100 people and then see them lying dead. Each member was prepared to shoot and kill and never speak about it again. They were a criminal killing force. The Schutzstaffel was the sole perpetrator of the mass murder of millions of Jews. They orchestrated Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, where 30,000 Germans, Austrians, and Sudetens were jailed in concentration camps simply because they were Jewish. The SS ran all Nazi concentration and gas camps, where murder was a daily task. The mobile killing units, also known as the Einsatzgruppen, followed behind Germany's advancing lines and shot and killed entire Jewish communities in occupied territories. The SS was an integral part in developing and carrying out the Holocaust, and during this genocide, the SS planned Operation Reinhard, where they murdered almost 2 million Jews in Nazi-occupied Poland. They were an organization of ruthless murderers. In concentration and work camps, the SS massacred and tortured its many prisoners. They then made sure that anyone remaining alive in Nazi work camps would be worked to death. And they didn't just kill, they often lied about their killings. In the Dachau concentration camp in 1933, the SS reported the cause of death of prisoner Sebastian Nevsker as death due to a self-inflicted large wound on his left hand. However, the autopsy findings were contrary to the assumption that the wound had been self-inflicted. It must be assumed that the cause of death was suffocation. As for a cause for suffocation, strangulation and throttling must be considered. So not only did the SS kill Nevsker, they tried to pretend that they didn't, and then they listed a fake cause of death. However, this is just one criminal action, one of many victims of this cruel organization. In SS-run concentration camps, prisoners were tortured through scientific experiments. In an intense chilling experiment in Dachau, prisoners were submerged in freezing cold water in a flying uniform wearing an aviator helmet. Fatalities occurred when the brainstem and the back of the head were also chilled. People were killed because of what the SS called an experiment, but what is probably better labeled as torture. Another experiment consisted of shooting prisoners with poisonous bullets. The SS doctor performing the experiment described the participants' death in great detail, as the flow of saliva was so strong it could no longer be controlled by swallowing. Then a sensation of choking and vomiting started. After 58 minutes, the pulse of 2 of the persons could no longer be felt. These criminal experiments were a core piece of what went on in SS concentration camps. No matter what role they held in the SS, every member supported criminal activity through the marriage laws they followed. No SS men could get married without the approval of the SS Reich leader. A physical examination of the bride and guarantees for the bride's ideological and human character were required. If members were denied marriage certificates and decided to marry anyway, they would be stricken from the SS. They would have been given the choice of withdrawing. By gaining a marriage permit, SS members were not only showing that they supported the SS value of only creating racially superior families, they were also implying and supporting the idea that only Nordic German babies should be born in Germany. By supporting this positive form of eugenics, members were also supporting the negative form. If each member gained a marriage permit because they believed in creating a race of solely Aryan Germans, then they also believed that all non-Aryan Germans should be prevented from having children, whether that be through forced sterilization or murder. Through everyday actions, whether that be reading the Black Corpse or getting a marriage license, SS members were outwardly showing their devotion to the Schutzstaffel and its ideals. Members of the SS were required to submit themselves to the organization's core values, but if they decided that their personal beliefs didn't match up with those of the SS, they could leave. Members who got married without marriage permits would be removed from the SS, but they were given the choice of withdrawing. Perhaps it would be harder for members to find work if they left the SS, but that is a very small price to pay for leaving an organization created with the sole purpose of murder. Every member of the SS was a criminal. An SS postal worker may not have been committing criminal acts by simply delivering mail, but the mailmen became criminals because they knew the mission of the SS. They knew that the SS was created to torture and murder millions. They knew that members were selected based on their racial identity and because of their years of schooling in Hitler Youth learning to hate other human beings. The mailmen knew that the central values of the SS told each member to think of Jews as lice and other nations as nothing more than untapped workforces. Every member of the SS knew that this organization was created to efficiently and effectively commit crimes. And yet, they stayed. The mailmen didn't leave, even when leaving held no real consequence. If the SS had no members, it wouldn't have been able to run. But sadly, that wasn't the case. The SS had thousands of members. The SS had thousands of bystanders to its crimes, and that was what gave it its strength. Every member, from Himmler to the worst perpetrators of mass genocide, to the bystanders who chose not to leave and instead chose to stay as witnesses to the Schutzstaffel's crimes, are the criminals whom we must now hold accountable. Thank you.
We will now hear the response to the SS criminality motion by Attorney Zager. Please approach the stand.
Ladies and gentlemen of the International Military Tribunal, the unusual caricature of the SS does not allow current international laws in the Charter to prosecute the organization with effective and fair process. The expansive nature of the SS, along with the relationship between the organization and the government, means that the court cannot have a prosecution that abides by precedent. It is impossible to declare the SS as criminal without also charging minor civil servants, regular street police officers, and even postal workers with the crimes of those who carried out mass genocide. Declaring universal criminality undermines the honor of the court by ignoring all legal precedent set forth in international law. What little international law does apply to the SS bans collective punishment. Therefore, proceeding with a complete criminal charge against the entire SS convicts the signatory countries of the exact war crimes that they seek to condemn. Because of the massive influence that the SS had over Germany, declaring it a criminal organization indicts many civilians, sets a dangerous precedent for ex post facto prosecution, and ignites the basis for another international conflict. There are numerous issues with precedent, most importantly, the lack of explicit international laws against a state-sponsored criminal organization. The laws that have been used in the past for prosecuting members of criminal organizations, including ones from each of the signatory countries, are widely unhelpful in dealing with this unprecedented organization and its relationship with the German government. From the United States, the Alien Registration Act of 1940 has been commonly used as evidence of legal precedent for prosecuting organizations. However, this law is clearly not applicable to the SS. This act focuses solely on criminal organizations whose mission it is to overthrow the government, not ones that are acting from within the government. The language of this law further proves this point. It shall be unlawful for any person to organize any group or assembly of persons who teach, advocate, or encourage the overthrow or destruction of any government by force or violence, or to become a member of or affiliate with any such society. Another signatory country, Great Britain, has similar laws. The Unlawful Societies Act of 1799 and the Seditious Meetings Act of 1817. The Unlawful Societies Act of 1799 prohibits groups that aim to overturn the laws, constitution, and government of Great Britain and Ireland and work to dissolve the connection between the two kingdoms, so necessary to the security and prosperity of both. Societies of a new and dangerous nature, inconsistent with public tranquility and with the existence of regular government, should be utterly suppressed and prohibited, as they are highly dangerous to the peace and tranquility of these kingdoms, and against the government of our sovereign lord the king, and against the peace and security of his majesty's liege subjects. The Seditious Meetings Act of 1817 outlawed assemblies of diverse persons that serve the ends of seditious persons, to the great danger and disturbance of the public peace. This law prohibits groups that incite acts of riot, tumult, and disorder, and may become the means of producing confusion and calamities within the nation. Clearly, the SS was not an organization that was aimed to overthrow the existence of regular government, or was dedicated to serving seditious persons, which further proves that these laws are incredibly unhelpful as legal precedent. Just like the laws enacted by the US, these laws focus only on situations where the goal of the organization deemed criminal was to overthrow the government or cause unrest. There are additional examples found within the laws of the USSR and the French Republic, specifically the French Penal Code, which makes membership of subversive organizations a crime. The reality of these laws is that they are unequipped to deal with the structure of the SS. There is little to no legal precedent regarding organizations of this scale in relationship to the government. Not only does the lack of precedent prohibit legal prosecution, a universal charge also impedes on the sovereignty of Germany. The SS essentially became the German state, and it was inseparable from the government. Declaring the SS as a criminal organization is the same as concluding that the entire German government is criminal, and this charge disregards the sovereignty that the government holds over the nation. Ignoring the established ideals of sovereignty abandons the principles of international order and has the opportunity to create dangerous legal precedent for the future. Charging the SS as a criminal organization threatens the sovereignty of the German government and is a huge overstep for the signatory countries and the international community. Prosecuting with this insufficient precedent abandons the integrity of the tribunal, but also has the opportunity to set dangerous legal precedent for generations to come. Without precedent for these accusations, any sort of universal declaration of criminality would be easily flagged as ex post facto law or could even be perceived as a degree of victor's justice. It is important to note that the last time a meeting such as this was held, it was one of the causes of World War II. The Treaty of Versailles is without a doubt partially responsible for this trial because it is so largely thought of as victor's justice and performative retribution by the German people. Prosecuting without precedent could easily contribute to that same feeling of resentment that would lead to another international conflict. It must be asked if the act of performative justice without precedent is really worth planting the seed for another destructive world conflict. The Charter of the International Military Tribunal does not provide enough precedent for the case in which entire divisions of the organization would be the exception to the ruling on organizational criminality. The extent to which the SS, as well as their members and affiliate organizations, control Nazi Germany makes the declaration of universal criminality unjust and unreasonable. An overarching charge of criminality cannot both encompass the crimes committed by leaders and not also indict the minor members of the SS in the larger crimes of their superiors. The broad influence of the SS allowed the organization to tamper with nearly every aspect of the German government, from the Reichspost, the Public Welfare Office, to the local police departments and minor civil servants, all the way to the concentration camps and mass genocide that horrified the world. The interconnected nature of this organization would allow subdivisions with vastly different aims to be categorized under the same declaration of criminality. For example, divisions as different as the ordinary police and the death head unit would both be classified as equally criminal organizations under this blanket charge. It cannot honestly be said that those who protected citizens from robberies and petty crimes can be justly indicted under the same universal criminal declaration as the men who carried out the guarding of concentration camps. Some sectors of the SS could be regarded as criminal. However, not all people who are associated with the SS are guilty of the crimes committed by a select few. Even though the charter sets that these exceptions should be dealt with in the lower courts, it must be argued that there was a significant lack of participation within these crimes which the SS is accused of, in terms of entire branches of the organization, not just individuals. Article 10 of the charter explains this exact issue. It states, in cases where a group or organization deemed criminal by the tribunal, the competent national authority of any signatory shall have the right to bring individuals for trial within membership therein before national, military, or occupation courts. Plainly, this article allows for later trials in signatory courts to be carried out for individuals who believe that their relationship to the government, who believe their relationship with the criminal organization is not significant enough to indict them. While the charter calls for subsequent hearings to be held to prove individuals not guilty, it does not account for the case in which entire divisions of the organization would be the exception to the ruling on organizational criminality. When entire divisions of an organization on trial are not criminal, it no longer becomes an individual exception. Rather, it disproves the idea that the organization in question is actually criminal. Accusing a Reichspost worker of being part of a wider conspiracy when they deliver any letter to anyone within Germany is absurd. If a Reichspost worker is somehow advancing the conspiracy by delivering a letter, then, by applying the same logic, the United States postal worker should be declared criminal when they deliver threatening letters or hate mail. This does not just apply to the Reichspost. There are many other subdivisions of the SS whose criminality can be just as easily disproven. This does not make those who did participate in criminal actions exempt. However, it invalidates the idea that the entire organization is criminal. Since whole divisions of the SS were insignificantly involved with the wider conspiracy supposedly at play, declaring the entire SS as criminal is immoral and it ignores international law. The third indictment, war crimes, prohibits inflicting collective charges upon the population for acts of individuals for which it could not have been regarded as collectively responsible. These charges of collective criminality violate Articles 50 of the Hague Relations of 1907, the laws and customs of war, the general principles of criminal law, the internal penal laws of the countries in which such crimes were prohibited, and Article 6b of the Charter. As outlined in the Charter, the idea of collective punishment was solidified as a war crime, and the charge of universal criminality clearly violates the trust that the international community has placed within the tribunal. Ignoring precedent surrounding the collective punishment convicts the signatory countries of the same war crimes they are trying to condemn to the tribunal. The reach of SS jurisdiction makes a universal declaration of criminality irresponsible. There is insufficient precedent within the Charter to allow for the realities of SS hierarchy to be dealt with in an appropriate manner. In addition, there is explicit international law regarding the prohibition of collective punishment. These laws are confirmed by the indictments of the International Military Tribunal. Any violation of these laws disregards the trust that the international community has placed within this tribunal. The wide variety of divisions under SS command makes it impossible to declare the SS as criminal without also charging minor civil servants, regular street police officers, and even ordinary postal workers with the crimes of those who carried out mass genocide. As established earlier, the SS had a remarkable influence on German life, and the reach of the organization extended far into the military. Once the Nazis were in power, the SS rose to prominence mainly as a military organization. In fact, in Nazi documents about the organization of the SS, it is explained that the duty of the organization is to be the protective core of the party and state, and that, with the acquisition of power within the Reich, the protective organization of the party became the protective organization of the state. Even though the SS may not have been a traditional military organization, its influence and connected with the Wehrmacht and the other German armed forces is undeniable. One of the best examples of this connection is the Waffen-SS. The entire idea of the Waffen-SS was to have a selective long service troop within the framework of the army. As established through Nazi documents and seen in the implementation of army-connected SS divisions, the SS had enough of a connection to the German armed forces to be considered a branch of the Nazi state military. The absence of the trials of the General Wehrmacht, Navy, and Luftwaffe is incredibly important, as these organizations have a direct relationship to the accusation of the SS. Because only the general high staff and command of the German armed forces has been indicted in this tribunal, it should be expected that all military organizations be tried in a similar fashion. Because the SS was an established sector of the German military, even proclaimed the protective core of the party and the state, they should be tried under the same guidelines as all other military affiliates present at this trial. Instead of trying the SS for universal criminality, it would be more appropriate to try the SS as individuals, or as a general staff and command, as is currently being done for all other German military organizations. Should the court try the SS as a criminal organization, it would undermine the impartial nature of the court that the signatory countries have promised the international community. In conclusion, the current international laws, along with the Charter, are unequipped to deal with prosecuting the SS as an organization. The expansive nature of the SS, along with the relationship between the organization and the government, does not allow for a prosecution that abides by precedent. It is impossible to declare the SS as criminal without also charging minor civil servants, regular street police officers, and even postal workers with the crimes of those who carried out mass genocide. Declaring universal criminality undermines the honor of the court by ignoring all legal precedent set forth in international law. What little international law does apply to the SS bans collective punishment. Therefore, proceeding with a complete criminal charge against the entire SS convicts the signatory countries of the exact war crimes that they seek to condemn. Because of the massive influence that the SS had over Germany, declaring it a criminal organization indicts many civilians, sets a dangerous precedent for ex post facto prosecution, and ignites the basis for another international conflict. The lack of precedent regarding organizations of this stature and relationship to the government means that the SS cannot be declared as a criminal organization. Proceeding with a universal criminal charge would highlight a blatant disinterest in upholding international laws as well as established legal precedent. This would violate the trust that the international community has given the tribunal and undermine the honor and purpose of this trial. Thank you.
Attorney Bremen, can you please approach the stand for some questions? Can you please clarify whether the Schutzstaffel member should be charged based on membership of being a Schutzstaffel?
Every single member of the SS chose to be a member of the SS. It was not an instant membership. You had to go through racial exams, pass Hitler Youth records. So members were not only criminals, but they were choosing to be criminals. Therefore, every member, no matter what direct role they had in carrying out the Holocaust, was directly supporting the goals of this group.
Can you also please clarify the separation of SS individual members and the SS as an organization and how they differ from each other?
The organization itself developed the goals, the main goal being mass genocide, but members were submitting themselves to those goals. Each member had to join the SS and submit themselves to the organization's goals, and therefore they became a larger part of the organization itself.
Thank you. Attorney Zeiger, will you please approach the stand? Clarification question. The SS was not the official military of Germany, correct?
It was not, but its connection to the German military divisions is clear and apparent. And because they were such an integral part to some of the German armed forces, they should be tried as a general high staff in command. It is it undermines the impartial nature of this court to differentiate and change the legal proceedings between the SS and other German armed forces.
Okay, because I am having trouble understanding why they should be tried the same as the military organizations if they were not, if they were private.
They were not an official state military. However, their role developed as they originally started as the protective organization of the party. However, as their mission expanded, they became the protective organization of the state as established within Nazi documents. Clearly, the Nazis thought that the SS was part of their military. They protected the state. However, they were not part of the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, or the Navy. So while they aren't an official one, it was clearly thought of by the Nazi organization that the SS was their protective corps.
As Attorney Bremen already mentioned, do you agree that the members who joined the SS were joining voluntarily?
In some cases, I do believe they were. However, that blanket statement is not accurate for all members of the SS. The wide reach of the SS means that it includes offices such as the Public Welfare Office, the Office of the Education, the minor civil servants, and the Reich Post. And so I think it's unfair to say that those many of those people joined because they had an intense hatred of the Jews. I think in reality, it was a wartime decision. They needed to provide for their families. They needed to make some sort of money. And though they were affiliated with the SS, their goals were not associated with the general mission of the Nazi Party to get rid of the Jews from Central Europe.
Therefore, were the members who were asked or forced to join the Schutzstaffel, were they able to leave the Schutzstaffel without any consequences occurring for them?
The prosecution claims that there were no consequences for those who chose to leave the SS. But I would also argue that she brings up in her brief that those who differed from the mission of the SS were put up against a wall and shot. I would argue that there were severe consequences for those who chose to leave. And maybe they weren't immediately killed. However, they would definitely be blacklisted from any sort of job that they hoped to obtain after being in the SS. And people need to provide for their families. And I think there are severe consequences in terms of losing your status within German society and losing your livelihood for yourself and your family.
I'm having trouble understanding that if the Schutzstaffel's original intent was to protect the people of Germany, how did that authorize the destruction of people's property? How can you justify these actions based on the fact that it was already against the law and the argument of ex post facto law is not relevant?
The SS did have a role in orchestrating Kristallnacht and orchestrating the destruction of people's property. However, there are other organizations that play there as well. The SA had an important role in Kristallnacht, and the primary goal of the SS was to carry out orders from above. And the extent of their organization means that, yes, there were some people who were doing these heinous crimes. However, it is unfair to have a blanket charge over all of the members of the SS who did not participate in these crimes.
Thank you. The tribunal has gathered all the information that it needs, and we are going to go deliberate the case.
Please rise.